Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Yes. Welcome to the third doc talk of the Cannes markets called East-West Index 2020, which regions are underrepresented in programming of film festivals and why. My name is Martijn te Pas. I'm a guest programmer of Nordisk Panorama and consultant based in Stockholm. And first I'd like to thank Ji.hlava International Documentary Film Festival for the continuing collaboration with the Marché du Film and Cannes Docs. They've been doing so for many years and also in this online edition. And the market looks forward for this cooperation to continue. First, I'll introduce Marek Hovorka, founder and festival director of Ji.hlava International Documentary Film Festival since 1997. Ji.hlava is the largest event of its kind in Central and Eastern Europe, focusing on documentary and experimental cinema. And Marek has also been instrumental in many other initiatives like the Doc Alliance, Festival Network, East Silver Documentary Market, and online distribution through DAF Films. Jarmila Utratova will co-host this wonderful big panel. Jarmila has been part of Ji.hlava since 2013 and she is the head of industry. And together they will introduce 6 wonderful guests from all over the world. Alvaro Aroba from Bafici, Emily Buget from Vision du Réel in Switzerland, Wanling Cheng from Taiwan International Documentary Film Festival, Asaka Fujioka from the Yamagata International Film Festival in Japan, Veton Nurkolari from DocuFest Kosovo, and Tom Powers from Canada, who has founded Doc NYC and is working for TIFF and much more. Just one little message. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can keep asking questions to the panelists there, and they will be addressed the last 20 minutes. So not during the whole talk, but only the last 20 minutes. I will briefly come back at the end, but for now, I'll give the virtual microphone to Jarmila. Take it away.
Thank you, Martijn. So I also would like to thank to Cannes Docs and to Pierre Alexis for this opportunity to meet together in this extreme time, and thank you to all of our esteemed panelists. Special thanks to those from America, as it is very early morning. So we really appreciate your presence. When we were preparing this discussion, we were asked to avoid any coronavirus topics. So we decided to open the new topic and present you our latest research, which is named East-West Index 2020, with the undertitle, Which Regions Are Underrepresented in the Programming of Film Festivals and Why? In the time of concern over gender and equality and racial equality in the film industry, we would like to bring attention to the programming selection process of film festivals with regards to balance of the film world regions. So now I would like to ask Marek to present you our latest research on regional representation of films at film festivals worldwide.
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody. It's a real pleasure to having this talk in such a prestigious and experienced group of professionals coming from different parts of the world. And that means that all of us are taking this issue seriously. And I'm very curious what will be the results of this discussion at the end, and maybe what filmmakers can do also better to make their films more visible. What's also very important, that maybe it's just question of few more steps which are needed to be done. But let's start with this research we have done. We have started to do this research at the end of last year when we focused on representation of films coming from Eastern Europe at West European film festivals and vice versa. And it was really interesting to see the numbers. Always you have a feeling, but when you go to numbers, something is very obvious. And we used the opportunity of this talk to enlarge this perspective and to go through different types of festivals all across the world and to think how open we are to different approaches of filmmaking coming from not national, but coming not from our regional contexts. So I will ask Geoffrey to start the presentation. I will lead you quickly through, and then we will start discussion. So we started to call it East-West Index, but it also can be named like North-South Index or whatever we want. The main issue is equality and representation and underrepresentation. So let's start with comparing festivals in Europe. We split them in West and East. Please, next slide. Yes, and we can continue the next slide. And the first festival we will focus on is CPH Docs. It's the last edition from 2020, but on the website eastwestindex.com, you can also see numbers from last 3 editions. So it's not only about numbers from the last edition, but to have it more clear and easier, we focused at every festival on the last edition which had happened. So we can see that 60% of films presented at CPH Docs came from Western Europe, out of which 44% were national films, compared to 9% of films coming from Eastern Europe, or 11% of films coming from Asia, 2% from South America, only 2%, and the same with Africa. We can continue the next slide, please. IDFA, the last edition from 2019, presented 296 films, out of which 51% were representing or were coming from Western Europe, and 9% from Eastern Europe. And then you can see that it's very equal. South America, North America, and Asia represents 11% of films in the whole program. Of course, if we go into each section, we will see a different perspective, but this is an overview, which is pretty interesting. The next slide, please. Visions d'Irel, this year, the online edition, presented 134 films, out of which 45% were coming from Western Europe, and less than half were Swiss films. 13% are coming from Eastern Europe, and then almost the same have Asia, North America, and South America. So we see that then it's balanced, that each region, Eastern Europe, Asia, South America, North America, represents almost the same, and we also see 6% of African films. We can move on, and we'll go through East European festivals. We'll start with Beldocs, 2019 edition, which presented 120 films, and now we see pretty different, because Beldocs presented 42% coming from Western Europe, and also 43% of films coming from Eastern Europe, but only 12% of these 43 were national films. So it's really, Beldocs represents the huge selection of East European cinema, but we can see only 6% of films coming from Asia and 4% of films coming from North and South America. Thank you. The next slide. DocuFest Prizren, and Veton Nukolari, who is here, is the director. So we see again a pretty balanced selection of European films. Half is West European, half is East European. The percentage of national films is 27 out of this 1/3. And then the highest number is 11% coming from North America, and then around 5, 6, 8 from other regions. The last one from Eastern Europe is Ji.hlava, of course. We should present also our numbers. So this is the Ji.hlava last edition. We presented 286 films. 53% were coming from Eastern Europe, but 60% out of this is the national films. 27% of the program is represented by West European films. 10% from North America, 6% from Asia, only 3% from South America, and 1% of films from Africa. Yes, and let's go on and move to Asia. Taiwan International Film Festival, the edition in 2018, presented 183 films, out of which 79% were coming from Asia. Of course, Asia is the largest continent, the most populated continent. And out of this 79%, almost half of them were national film, Taiwanese films. Then the second most represented cinema is coming from, no, please, Taiwan back. If we can see the slide from Taiwan. The second was Eastern European cinema, if I remember. No, back, one slide back. Yes, thank you. So 11% of the films are coming from Eastern Europe, 6 from Western Europe, and 3% from North America, and 1, so that means 1 or 2 films, probably 2, from South America. Thank you, and let's move to Yamagata. Yamagata had the last edition last year in 2019 and presented 167 films in its program, out of which 2/3 were Asian films, and half of these films were Japanese films. The rest of the program were represented by 11% of West European films, 10% of North American films, 7% of Australian films. This is a festival which takes most care of Australian cinema from those we went through. And then about 3% of East European film and 2% of South American films. Again, African cinema has just 1%, so it's between 1 or 2 films. Let's move forward and we go to North America. Thanks to Tom, we can focus on 2 film festivals because he works for Doc NYC, but also for Toronto. So let's start with this New York Documentary Festival taking place in October 2019, which presented 161 films, out of which 55% were North American, and almost all of them were American, that means coming from United States. 22% of films were produced in Western Europe, 11 in Asia, 5% in Eastern Europe, and then you can see 4% in Australia and 2% of films coming from South America. Yes, and let's move to Toronto numbers, which are pretty different. Toronto, the last edition took place in September 2019, presented 287 films, out of which 31%, the largest presentation, were given to West European films, and 30% of films represented North America, out of which just 1/3, or a little bit more, were coming from Canada. Then the third region, which was largely focused on, is Asia, with 15% of films, 9% to East European cinema, and 7% to South America. And we can continue to South America, thank you. And thanks to Alvaro, we have focused on Bafisi. The last edition in 2019 presented almost 300 films, out of which 38% were coming from South America and almost 90% were national films. The second most reflected region was Western Europe, representing 26% of production, followed by Eastern Europe with 19%. So altogether, it's almost half of the program, 45%. 11% of the program were represented by North American films and 6% by Asian films. And let's move to the end. So we went quickly through all numbers you can find on eastwestindex.com or on the website of the festival. So thank you very much for your attention, and let's start the discussion. Jarmila.
So now let's open the floor for our panelists. And first question goes to Tom, because America was at the forefront of the debate on gender equality in the film industry. So the question is, what criteria influence the selection of films in addition to the quality? Do they also include the gender of the filmmakers, ethnicity, regions? Tom, what do you think?
Sure. So, I would say, first of all, speaking, I live in New Jersey, outside New York City, where I also contribute to the Toronto Film Festival. And you know, I have to acknowledge that in the U.S. right now, we're going through a time, you know, a month of street protests that are all about representation, not necessarily international representation, but you know, driven by the Black Lives Matter movement. And it is a time of reckoning like I don't think I've ever, you know, seen in my life. I think you'd have to go back to the late 60s in the United States to think of a time that had so much clash and progress over this. And I think about the late 60s because that was a time when you saw a split in this country, a generational split between what was used to be described as the old left and the new left. You know, the old left were an older generation that felt like they stood for a certain set of liberal values, and they were kind of surprised when this younger generation came forward and moved the needle forward in their tactics, in their impatience, in their expectations. And I feel like right now, this month, that I'm living through that same experience as, you know, as a middle-aged programmer, that I see a younger generation, you know, people on my own staffs at Doc NYC in Toronto who have this new set of expectations, who are pushing me further in a good way. But it's a very whiplash kind of experience. So I just want to acknowledge that because it's, you know, it is a backdrop to all of my thinking right now as I prepare for both Toronto and Doc NYC. To, you know, quickly answer your question before, and I won't take much more time, you know, in our, both for Toronto and Doc NYC, we're always looking for a balance. And, you know, we typically will go through our screening and we'll make the lists of our favorite films with my colleagues. And then we'll step back and we'll try to ask ourselves, you know, what's missing from this list? You know, what is the representation of the representation? What is the international representation? And you know, what is the representation between veteran filmmakers and new voices? There's, you know, all kinds of filters that we put that through.
And maybe if you can continue, Tom, please, on comparing the New York experience with your Toronto experience, because we could see that the numbers are different, and that in Toronto it's much more balanced, maybe from this regional perspective compared to New York Film Festival. Even, of course, Toronto is not only documentary, it's big fiction film festival with some documentary program, but Doc NYC is a documentary film festival. But also it's different in terms of presentation American film. I mean, films coming from United States, which are very much presented in the film festivals worldwide. So how you also deal with this question, how much attention should be focused or given to American production?
Yeah, so you know, some differences between TIFF and Doc NYC. TIFF is a festival that's been going over 40 years. We have a staff of nearly 20 festival programmers. You know, we're putting our feet on the ground in every continent, or at least we were before COVID-19 each year. So Doc NYC, by comparison, is this is our 11th year, and we have a much smaller programming staff. Also, you know, New York City, you know, has probably the biggest documentary making population of any city in the world. A big part of our mission at Doc NYC is to serve that community. Big part of the mission at Doc NYC is also to serve the diversity of our city. But you know, there are so many different ethnic and racial communities in New York City that that often want to see their stories filtered through a local example. So I, can think of a film we showed last year, Brooklyn Inshallah, that's about the Arab American community in New York City. I can think, I can think of a number of films that we were showing about different parts of the world that would have been captured in your numbers as North American films. But, I am not alone about Armenia. That may have been captured as a North American film because that's where the filmmaker is based. Or My Khoi and the Dissidents, about the Vietnamese activist, was by a US filmmaker, but really brought out a Vietnamese community to see it in New York. So that's a factor. I think it doesn't get away from the importance to be capturing films, from their native countries. The film that won our jury prize last year at Doc NYC was City Dream from China. So that reflects that films from different parts of the world can do very well in our festival.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Wan Ling, who is a programmer of Taiwan Documentary Film Festival. How do you reflect this research? Because we could see that Asian production is really underrepresented in most of the film festivals, but you and Yamagata give really huge space for Asian production. So where's the mistake? Do you think that Asian production is very much linked to the national or regional context, or it's invisible for film festivals which are not coming from Asia?
I think I have to start from 2013 when our current team took over the festival, because before 2013 the festival team was not always the same each year. And then since then on, since 2013, we've been thinking what kind of festival we're trying to create in Asia as well as in the world. For us, I think, like you said, a lot of research says that Asian films are very much underrepresented in a lot of festivals in the world, especially in West Europe and some parts in North America as well. So we're trying to set ourselves as a platform for these films, these Asian films. These maybe they're not huge in production, maybe they're not perfect, maybe they have this and that little flaws, but they are the little gems that we can show to people to bring it to our audience and really show the characteristic of Asian films. That's what we're trying to do. So I think that thought reflected on our program, and that's why it's a huge percentage of Asian films in our program. And of course, your research was based on 2018, which was a crazy year. We showed 183 films that year, including a huge program of Southeast Asian film. I think there were 30 or 33 titles. Usually we don't show that many films in one program. So that's a special program as well in that year.
And maybe, do you think that professionals coming from Europe or Americas understand Asian cinema? Do they orient it in filmmakers?
I think people would learn or know gradually if they watch these films. Like if they have more opportunities to access to these films. And I think it's relatively easier for us, especially in Taiwan or in East Asia, to see films like documentaries or fiction films in Asia, like Western films, let's put it that way, like films from North America, films from East Europe. It's relatively easy for us to access to those films. So it's not making much sense for us to show more of those films. So I think that's the difference here.
And do you see that those films which are screened at non-Asian festivals, do they look differently are they films somehow made for international audiences, or you see different qualities but not this different style, which is more close to sensitivity of European or American cinema?
I think, well, like in your presentation, you mentioned that Asian is a huge continent as far as to Middle East to Russia. They're actually Asian, so people grew up in different cultural backgrounds, and that led to different way of thinking, and that reflect on the films they make as well. So I think it's very, very much different.
Thank you, Wanling. Thank you. And now I would like to ask Emily, the director of Vision du Réel in Switzerland. Emily, do you think that the festivals should have a discovery role? Or how do you choose the films for your selection? Only from submissions, or do you also search in different territories?
Both. I mean, I think that what we get in our submission is also composed of things that we have, you know, kind of like found during our travels. We do travel a lot, the 5 members of the selection committee and myself, and we try, of course, to cover the different regions, even if, of course, some of them are easier to, you know, find doors into than on others. I think that our programming is mainly composed of the submission, but I think that we do, of course, follow projects and, you know, kind of like get to meet people that later will submit the film or will submit the project, because also, you know, I don't know how it is for the others, but in our case, in many cases, there are projects that, you know, somehow are also connected to our industry before they enter the program later. So, you know, there is something like that goes kind of naturally. In regard to discovery, I mean, in our case, we definitely are very much keen on looking for newcomer people that maybe are not yet in the circuit, and that we might be helping to kind of like enter it and kind of like work in different manners in some cases, because for instance, I forgot his name, but you will help me, Marek. This great director from Azerbaijan. You know, it's typically someone that you feel like, you know, you want to help someone that's been working alone for years, and kind of like allow them to maybe, you know, work differently in the future. So I think that for us, it's really an essential part of our work, and that's why also we have a lot of first features in the selection each year, and yeah, that's how it works.
So how these newcomers can approach you? Just through the submissions?
Yes, in our case, the process is very democratic. I mean, of course, it's not a flawless process. I think that we are all very aware that those selection processes are complicated, because it's a lot of films and it's hard to, you know, kind of like be always sure that you don't miss something that might have been relevant or kind of interesting for the program. But in our case, it's very democratic, and each single film that is submitted, it's 3,000 each year, more or less, is going to be watched by at least one programmer, and is going to be following the usual process, selecting process. For each film, we have like a note and a rate and everything. So it's kind of like actually quite a square process. So it's just about submitting, and you don't need to know anybody to enter the program. You just need to make a great film, which is very subjective, again, of course. And we did receive, for instance, 2 years ago, an email by a girl based in the US from Pakistan, that whose film we had selected and who had started with us, and who said she was actually amazed that you know, that it is such a democratic process, and that you would just submit and be able to enter the festival. So I think that, yeah, in our case, it's very straightforward.
It was interesting what Tom said when compared the team of Toronto Film Festival and Doc NYC programming team, which we know that huge festivals have many more people working for program committees compared to documentary film festivals. Is this something which might be problem in the future and documentary film festivals should really focus on? Or you believe that it's still possible from your perspective, for example, in Neon, when you work with a group of 6-7 people as a programming board, if I'm right? To 5 people, to somehow understand the differences between the contemporary cinema, for example, in Africa and Europe?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think of course, it's a sensitive question. I'm very aware that the work we had the group we had this year is very European, and I understand it is an issue. The problem is, like, I think that there are 2 ways to work. Either you have a very large pre-selection committee that is composed of many people from many different backgrounds, and each film is going to be watched by 2 films, and they do the first sorting, and then they bring it to the second group, which is the selection committee. But then again, already you lose some films potentially because you know, because because it's just like, it's a larger group. To me, it's very difficult to imagine. I mean, if I have to replace just one programmer, it's a thing that is going to inhabit me for nights, because I think that it's very sensitive, because, like, you know, there are not so many films that we are going to love in this 3,000 submissions. So you want to be sure as possible that they're going to be seen like that. And it's a lot of films to watch, and, you know, it's difficult. So either you go for that strategy, or you go for a strategy with a smaller group, and then it has to be a group. And the constraints are a little bit harder, because in our case, it is a group that is going to watch, you know, 800 or 1,000 films, that is going to write text, that is going to be in Lyon for several weeks, that is going to be, you know, that is going to have a set of requirements. So if I want to work with someone that is based, you know, in another country very far, then I have to change the process. And so far, I'm quite happy with the process, because I think that this process so far allows us to do a good job. So, you know, of course, it's a political question, and again, I'm aware it's not flawless, because of course we are coming with our background, which is not the same as a background coming from someone coming from another country or context. But it is, again, it's like, it's a hard and tough work. So it's difficult to imagine, you know, to do everything remotely for me as well.
Thank you very much. Asako, please, I would like to follow this discussion asking you, because me as a programmer, I'm always thinking, where is the border between making the best program and as from my perspective as a curator, and where is the position of film festival as an institution which is responsible for bridging the cultures and creating understanding, which maybe sometimes doesn't mean showing films I would be personally touched by, but it's important not only for filmmakers living in the regions, but also it's creating understanding and opening our eyes. How do you think about this changing perspectives and personal curatorship from your Yamagata experience?
Right, yeah, Marek, thank you for bringing me back here, because I'm a former director. I'm not programming anymore per se, but I am in administration, and I have been overseeing, you know, our program over the years. And it's interesting that, I mean, the map that you showed earlier, the chart of our festival from last year, showed this large, you know, Australian component, and that's only because we had special programs. In our program, I think our program, only half of the films that we show are new films, and we have retrospectives and other focuses on regions or history, you know, as one of the missions of our festival. That's quite like it's quite a prominent one. So so the programming is not just about programming new films, what most of the discussion today has been about, but we did this program on Oceania, which is why we had so many Australian films. We did a small program on films from Northeast India, which is this small pocket of area between Myanmar and Bangladesh, which is kind of like a very separate from mainland India. Yeah, and from Iran also, we did a retrospective of 1960s and 70s films from Iran. And these are the films that are really important because of the context that they are put in. Whereas our competition films are chosen from a criteria which is completely different. You know, the competition films are films that are relevant today, which are of a certain, you know, I don't know, pushing the boundaries of what cinema can be today. Whereas the films from Iran, from the 60s and 70s, we are able to introduce our audience to a new generation, a new, you know, part of our film history. So when we talk about, you know, underrepresentation of cinema, I think that's one thing, that one of the roles that a film festival can play. We don't have to show, you know, films from North Korea just because it's not represented, you know, in any film festival in the world. But if we can show it in a certain kind of way to allow us to reflect on what their culture can show us, what we can learn from that, I think that's you know, it's a big mission accomplished for a film festival. Yeah, so I don't think that we have to be United Nations. Yeah, but the festival has different roles, and it's not just showing new films, is what I wanted to say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but of course it comes with different difficulties, you know, technical difficulties, you know, dealing with old films and bringing in this funding and passion and different kinds of curation needed for showing films from the past.
And how much is this programming influenced by audiences, for example? Because you, same as Ji.hlava, for example, we are festivals which are very much oriented also on the public. We have international, let's say, recognition of our programs, but also we are public oriented. So how do you combine this thinking about selecting films which are, I would say, radical, but also bringing audiences to watch them, yeah? Not only them.
Yeah, I think Wan Lin mentioned something about, you know, Western films, or I don't know, character-driven films, more popular kind of documentaries being available maybe in Taiwan, and also for us in Japan. We have a very healthy distribution, cinema distribution for documentaries, and that's bringing in all kinds of, you know, musical documentaries, or more the mainstream films are being shown in the cinemas or in the popular, you know, culture here in Japan. So as a film festival, we are able to you know, focus more on showing difficult films, or films that would not get distribution, or experimental films that, you know, are daring in form and style. So I think we work hand in hand with our industry, local market here. We are able to be what we are thanks to the mainstream commercial market that is sustaining another kind of documentary, and also television, I guess. NHK is doing broadcasting of world documentary, which is different from the kind of films that we choose and we program.
Mm-hmm. And is this the reason why you focus so much on Asian production, that you bringing it to Japanese public?
Yes, perhaps you're right that the Japanese audience is interested in Asian films, and we do cater to them, or we have a co-dependency relationship with our audience, I guess, because in the past 30 years of our history, you know, we started out by trying to cultivate and support Asian documentary, like from the beginning in 1989. All of Asia was underrepresented in festivals because there were no creative documentaries, and because of, you know, our work of trying to introduce them into supporting filmmakers, gradually we were able to, I mean, the filmmakers were able to gain, you know, more to start following. There were big hubs like, you know, in Taiwan and in Southeast Asia also. There are a lot of festivals that are coming out that are locally responsible for cultivating, audiences and filmmakers. Yeah. So it's part of our history that we are really geared towards Asia, and perhaps the very beginning, 1989, it has to do with our relationship with the war, World War II. Japan was a very strong, aggressive perpetrator in that war, and I think the generation that started our festival felt very much responsible for to support culture in Asia, to pay reparation in some kind of a way for what Japan had done in the war.
Okay, thank you very much, Asako. And now we'll go to South America, to Alvaro from Bafisi. Please, when we are selecting films, we bear a great responsibility, not only to our audience, but also to filmmakers. So to what extent we are under pressure of the kind of like a fashion waves of the films, and can we prevent it? Can we kind of be aware of it and not do it?
Yes, in fact, we are in a way obsessed by this, by fashion ways. No, because we in Buenos Aires Film Festival, the Independent Film Festival in Bafisi, we are the group of the programmers. We're 7, and we don't have any previous filter before. So all the films that we get, like in Neon, we get them through a large, huge drive, around 3,000 more or less films per year, and we have to, between this among the 7 of us, we have to see the films, and we have to make sure that we see all of them, and we discuss them and all that. And as I was saying before, we are a group of most of us very hardcore cinephiles, former critics, and some are still critics. And we worked in previous of working in film festivals. We wrote for magazines and all that, and we were like very into cinephilia, no? So we are into the waves, or the formal waves, and yes, the fashions of film festivals, and we also travel to film festivals. So we compare all of these currents, no? And of course, we detect that some trends of formal filmmaking are like unificating cinema in a way, like creating a common language, which is, so to speak, the language of film festivals. And we can see that film from Africa, both documentary or fiction, is very similar to a film of Argentina or Europe or France, or because, yes, the question is very good, because there's a kind of unification of excessive formalization of some films that we are being submitted. No, so we try to be alert because it's a bit endogamic. No, if you know what I mean. No, it's a bit endogamic, and finally, some films are more oriented into not what they want to talk about, but the way, or the stylization, or the aesthetics, or for example, of course, you all are programmers, and you see that let's say 80% of the documentaries we're receiving have large amounts of shots in drones. No, drone. No, so some of them they are like over drones, so to speak, which is a word that just I invented. No? And that's just a slight example, no. And for example, we in South America, as we saw in the the graphics that you showed of 50, we have a large amount of South American films and Latin American films, Brazilian films, and of course Argentina films, because we have an obligation to show these realities, these filmmakers. Like so, we have a large amount of films that are like retold, told in first person. We have a lot of family films, because as you know, filmmakers here, they are very devoted to what they have first, because they have no money to shoot, so they shoot the families, they shoot the, and they shoot the, they make requests and investigations of the past of the families, overall related to political questions, you know. And we also have to be very alert not to repeat many films of this formal or of this narrative, you know, so to speak. No, so yes, we try to avoid all those fashions, and we try to look for films that they found their own way of being told, you know, aside of these old-fashioned ways of filming. No, I don't know if I'm being clear, but there are lots of. I spoke about drones, but I spoke about first persons, but I can also speak about documentaries that move to a certain degree of trance or hypnotic way of filming reality, you know. And like, for example, there's this Bellatar kind of filmmaking which influenced it during the last 15 years to many documentaries, not only documentaries but also fiction films. No, these things sometimes are for our audiences in Buenos Aires that are very cinephile. Sometimes they get tiring with good reasons for that.
Thank you very much. Just to say that the last one will be Veton answering our questions, and then we will start Q&A. So if you have any questions, please type them and we will read them. And Veton, please, I will continue what Alvaro said. My I would say artistic project I have in my mind and trying to spread it to filmmakers is to make as many films as possible from one material, but each edit to make for each festival, because we know that each festival has a little bit different dramaturgy, and it will be very interesting to see if it would work and you could just create, you know, different types of films which fit to each dramaturgy of film festivals with one material, showing that the festivals maybe are too much presenting themselves and not films in concrete, but I mean presenting their own sensitivity. But speaking about this framing, I see also a huge influence of some workshops which are helping filmmakers, but at the end they are shaping their films in style which might be successful at Sundance or IDFA, and again, like creating these stereotypes which are maybe successful at that year, but who knows what will be with these films in a short time. So what is your perspective? Because DocuFest also has brilliant programming, and for sure, same as Alvaro and all of us, you deal with this type of, you know, framed films.
Well, I don't know. I think the situation and the case with DocuFest is probably slightly different from many of others. You know, we started the film festival in a country just coming out of the war. There had never been a film festival in this country before. No programmers, no film critics. So, you know, starting from complete scratch was like entering a void in a way. So we had to learn a lot. And doing this exercise and looking later on at the numbers, I was amazed, not only with the pie of DocuFest and see that we have this percentage from this region, and we have like, I don't know, 7% of African films. And I was amazed. And I started thinking, where did they come from? What is the interest? And it came down to, our growing interest actually in outside of, I should maybe say, mainstream cinema, of European cinema, of North African cinema. In my opinion, I started becoming interested in, let's say, Asian cinema for the last 4 or 5 years. Argentinian cinema, Brazilian cinema, Chilean cinema lately. So all this probably add to some sort of diversification, because I see DocuFest quite diverse. I didn't really know, to be honest, because we start looking at the numbers after we finish the selection, not before. We never go into selection process and say, okay, we are going to have 20% of films from this part, 30% from that part. And sometimes, actually, probably luckily, because we don't have the obligation to come up with the media numbers, because we are not part of media. So we don't receive any funding from media. So in a sense, we maybe don't have enough money, but we are liberated. So we can select films from there, we can select films from other parts of the world. And also what I learned from all these years is that actually we had to educate our audience, because they didn't know, just like us. So we did 1 year experiment, the other year experiment, bring films for this, we like this, we like that. And then slowly the audience started recognizing something. So I think that's one of the missions probably of what we put on our shoulders and said, okay, we do a documentary festival here, we bring films, and then we see what happens. I don't know if I managed to answer your question, because there's so many other things. You mentioned the workshops things, and of course we do a lot of workshops here, and last 10 years we've been mentoring and trying to see if young filmmakers can learn something. So of course part of our numbers from local films is also these little films that we're producing here.
Thank you, Beton. So now we'll open the floor for the Q&A session, and we were informed by the organizers that we can go until 12:45, so we'll take a bit longer, so please stay tuned. And let me ask the first question, asked by Estefania Arregui. She's asking, it's the gender topics underpresent per region, and are gender important issue for the curating process of the festival? And can I ask Tom to answer this question?
Sure. I mean, as I described in my opening remarks, gender is something that we take a big look at as the final list of films is coming together, and throughout the process. I mean, right now I'm in the process of putting together the Toronto Film Festival selection. There's always more men than women in our first passes, and part of the process is always like going back into the submissions and really looking at the female directors and seeing what's rich there, what we maybe overlooked in the first pass. I mean, the part of that question about gender representation across regions, I don't have the data to back that up, but it's a good question.
I'd like to continue with a question of Anam Abbas, and I would like to ask Alvaro for the answer. And the question is, why is European or North American cinema style called international, but global South cinema style local? Is it about purchasing power? Alvaro, what do you think?
Hello. Hi. Sorry, I cannot hear you now.
The question is why European or North American cinema is called international, but global South cinema is called local, according to Anam Abbas. Maybe you don't have the feeling that, or do you hear me?
Marek, I cannot hear you. I'm sorry. I can maybe, I don't know, maybe I will try to reconnect, okay?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Just the moment when you made a question for me. I will go out and in again, okay?
Yes. And there is a question also, we will wait that Alvaro will come back, and there is a question asking why African continent is so unrepresented. Maybe Tom, because you can share feedback from fiction film from Toronto and from documentary as well. What do you think about African representation worldwide?
Well, I mean, I think that question was asking specifically why in this panel there wasn't a
No, there's also other question asking.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. You know, I mean, at the Toronto Film Festival, the head of the festival, the artistic director of the festival, Cameron Bailey, is someone who's long had a stake in African cinema. 25 years ago, Cameron at TIFF created a section called Planet Africa that was really looking at the African diaspora cinema around the world. My colleague, Natalia Hunter-Young, who works at TIFF and at Hot Docs, she's been spending time working at the Durban Festival and traveling to other countries every year. So, you know, I would turn to their expertise. It's not a region where I'm well traveled. You know, there are some bright spots. I think of the filmmaker from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ji.hlava IDFF, who had a film that was selected by Cannes this year. We showed his film at Toronto a few years ago, National Diploma. So I think, you know, I mean, certainly in the 15 years that I've been in the job at Toronto, I see not a flood of films from Africa, but definitely a gradual increase from that region.
If Alvaro is back, do you hear us, Alvaro? Do you hear us? If somebody's wrong, so please, Jarmila, choose the other question.
May I have the question again?
You're back, great. The question was, according to the person who asked, that European or North American cinema is called international cinema, but even global South American cinema is called local. Why do you think, where it's rooted, that some kind of global cinema is international and some is still being local? Is it related to power?
Local.
Yes.
But I don't know exactly what the question exactly means. But for me, like I was trying to explain before, we don't have any we don't make any distinctions between European or North American cinema and Eastern Asia or South American in way of the way they are told, the way they are retold, and of course we also don't have any pressure in the number of or the ratio of country that we have to select, or a gender or anything. Like our friend said before, we just select, and we see the films and we try to look for new things.
It seems we lost Alvaro again, or so maybe Jarmila, if you can choose
Yes.
question, and then I have a question for everybody.
For everybody? Okay, so actually there is a long question, but then in short, it's by Tagi Amirani, asking how do we avoid reinforcing stereotypes of East and South that do not challenge audiences? So let's conclude the round session with answering all answers from all of our panelists. So, for example, Beton, can you open the discussion?
Maybe I can. I don't know. How do we make sure that the world is represented? Is that what the question was, or?
The question was, how do we avoid reinforcing stereotypes of we East and South, and so that we challenge audiences?
Well, I don't think we should be blamed that we are enforcing stereotypes in the first place. Well, our job is to be as democratic as possible in bringing as diverse films as possible, or at least I understand my job and the mission of the festival I'm working with. So I think it's a big thing to say that we are enforcing stereotypes. I don't say that there are no stereotypes, but I don't think that the festivals should be blamed for East and West and North and South and local or international. There are some other forces that are probably using and enforcing these stereotypes, in my opinion. So but what we can do is try to be as open-minded as possible, not ignoring one region for other region, be how can I say, be open-minded. I think that's what probably is the good word, and I think most of the festivals or people from the festivals and people I know are just that. They have no stereotypes. They don't pick up a film because it's from East or it's from West per se, but because it's a good film, that's one thing, or because it's a good story with a very important topic in most of cases, and because it should be seen by the audience. I think that's what we are doing. We are not a big, huge fiction festival that needs to think about the red carpet and stars and audiences. I think our mission is somewhere else. You know, there's huge and important things happening across the globe, and we are just finishing the selection here. So I am hugely preoccupied with what we are going to present here and how, and what is going to be left out, because there's so many great films that of course doesn't end up in the selection. And of course, on top of that, we have the situation with whether we go online, is it safe? And my preoccupation is, for example, safety at the moment. Should we go physical? If we go physical, how safe it is? Online, how good it is? So, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Well, this question of stereotypes is, I would like to enlarge it maybe, and asking other panelists if you also miss something in the contemporary documentary film production. So Emily, can you wrap it up?
I mean, like, if I may just like start with the beginning of the question, because I think it's interesting, and to me it sounds like it goes to the question of who is making the film, which is of course a recurring question, because I think that to us, to some extent, of course, we have a strong responsibility as programmer, but there is also a strong responsibility on the side of the director. And if the director comes from this country, or if it's someone else that is shooting, you know, in a country that is going to be very foreign to himself or herself, of course, the approach is going to be really different. So I think this is also a very important question in this notion of, you know, like reinforcing stereotypes. Of course, if we have a Western European director that goes shooting in Africa, there is a risk. I'm not saying we should not show those films, but there is a stronger risk than if it's an African who is going to be shooting in his own country or in a country that is close to his. So I think that is also something that, you know, somehow is also allowing us to understand more how films are produced. And I think it is also this meta information is really also important for us to know, you know, in what kind of condition and by whom the films are produced in regard to this question of stereotypes within the film. And sorry, then you were asking about
if you are missing something in this contemporary film production documentary.
In general, I'm missing fiction maybe sometimes. No, I don't know. It depends. It really depends on the year, you know. It depends on I think it really depends on the year. I think that there are years where I feel like, you know, there are just like those few films that, you know, you're gonna keep with you forever. And there are years where there are like many very good films, but it's really hard to know, you know, which one will stick for a very long time, which doesn't mean they have no value, of course, you know, but it's really sometimes but that's a very personal thing. I really need to have, you know, 2 or 3 films I'm really crazy about to kind of like drive me and have like, you know, kind of like a line to follow. But again, that's a program. I think in general, I'm very happy with the international production.
Thank you, thank you. So because we are running out of time, I will ask Van Link for her last reaction.
You mean on this question? I think I'm gonna echoing with Beton. I think for us, while we program for our festival, we don't put. We try to be open-minded. Of course, we keep all these balance in mind. Like we should have something from which region, something from that topic. All these we keep that in mind, but it's very important to be open-minded. And there's one thing personally I really want to share is that there was someone I admire. He's some very senior programmer in Taiwan, and he once said something. As a festival, you always have to be one or a few steps ahead of your audience. Like you have to challenge them in a way that you challenge yourself while programming for your festivals. And I think that's the thing that that's the model we've been trying to practice in our festival. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's
absolutely. I really like your answer. Challenging is always needed. And last reaction from Asako, can I ask you?
Yes, about stereotypes. I was recently, checking into these pitching forums that have gone online, and I really noticed that decision makers, when they come upon this universal theme, or this story can be, you know, a single mother struggling, it can take place in this country, that country, any kind of country. And then they say, but what is unique about this project, and why is it, you know, in your country? So I think that, the stereotypes, it's on one hand, these questions force a filmmaker to think about what it is actually that they want to, the focus on in the film. But aside from the universality, I think the programmers, or I think commissioning editors often in television, they want something from Myanmar, or they want something from Taiwan. Or they really want something that can be segmented or categorized. And those kind of questions can, if you are not sure of your direction, these decision makers can actually influence the way your film can go. And I'm a little bit, afraid for that. It's about a matter of power relationship between the filmmaker and the decision maker in the pitching forum. So the workshop scene, is very helpful in many ways, but it can also be direct films in certain directions, not necessarily towards individuality, but towards stereotyping oneself from one's background.
Thank you very much, Asako. And Alvaro, if you are connected, can we hear your last words, also including this question about stereotypes and how we can prevent it?
Prevent stereotypes in documentary.
In the selection of documentary films.
In the selection of the country. The thing is that lately we're not, the films that we select and we used to see, we don't see so much stereotyping. So, because as I was trying to say before, sometimes most of the parts of them are in a way like in a similar way of storytelling. So what sometimes we look a little bit for for the tiniest regional specifications of films, no? Because they try to, most of these films try to avoid very consciously stereotyping. So they do the work for us, no? And sometimes we miss a little bit that, no? So in our program team, and yeah, it's something very strange. But the documentary production of globally speaking, they do the work for us, and as these films are made of from many directors that go to film festivals and they see films and all that. Sometimes I see themselves with this kind of stereotyping, no? So they kind of do the work. I don't know if I was understood.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alvaro, very much. And the last but not least, Tom, can you wrap it up on your side?
Well, I think of programming as sitting between the filmmakers and the audience. And while we also listen to the filmmakers, we also have to listen to our audience. And, I know in New York City or Toronto, I have audiences that come from more different backgrounds are represented in my audiences than I'd ever be able to build into my staff. And when we make a misstep with a film, we definitely hear it from our audiences. If there's a film that that they think is misrepresenting the part of the world that they know well. I also think that we think a lot about programming, but we also have to think about our marketing teams and having as much diversity in the way we think about marketing our films to audiences as we think about diversity in choosing the films. We've all had experiences at film festivals where you walk into a film and there's only 5 or 10 people in the audience, and so it doesn't really matter if you're programming a diverse selection of films if there isn't an audience coming to see them. So I think that's a pressure that we need to put on ourselves is to bring those audiences in.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you very much to all of you. What I could read in messages, there are mostly not questions, but comments that the audience is very happy for this discussion and for opening this issue, because being a festival programmer or filmmaker, everybody sees it as an issue. And in atmosphere of talking about underrepresentation, for example, of gender or racial underrepresentation, this is another angle how to think about position of film festivals and its role. So this is not the end, this is just the beginning of the discussion, and I'm very happy we could have such a great attention thanks to Cannes Docs for Talks and all our guests. So thanks very much to all of you, and looking forward to see you soon. And hopefully in Ji.hlava, the last week of October.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was amazing. It was really wonderful. Thank you also to the market and Pierre-Alexis Chevit and Geoffrey Garot. And of course, hope to see you back tomorrow morning at 11:30 with another discussion with Doc Leipzig. Thanks, everyone, and hope to see you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Écoute, hello Jamila. Tac, 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 et tac, tac, tac. Ça a quand même des problèmes avec le guide, il faut suivre un respect de protocole. Oui.
Marco, coś tam jeszcze?